What happens when one of the most talked about women in the world sits down for what should be a simple conversation and turns it into an absolute disaster? In just 36 seconds, a single comment would ignite a firestorm that would see her storm off the set in front of millions of viewers. This is the story of how Meghan Markle got kicked off Piers Morgan's show. The studio lights were bright that morning. Piers Morgan sat behind his desk, coffee in hand, ready for another day of hard-hitting television. His show had become known for asking the questions other people were too afraid to ask, and today he had a guest who had been avoiding tough questions for far too long. Meghan Markle walked onto the set wearing a cream-colored dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The audience applauded politely as she took her seat across from Piers. She crossed her legs and settled into the chair like she owned the place. "Meghan, welcome to the show," Piers said, his voice warm, but with an edge that anyone who watched regularly would recognize. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her American accent crisp and clear. "Let's get right into it, shall we?" Piers leaned forward slightly. "You've made some very serious allegations over the past few years. Allegations about your time in the royal family, about racism, about being silenced. But when pressed for details, for proof, for anything concrete, you've been rather vague. Why is that?" The smile on Meghan's face tightened. "I think what I've shared has been very clear, Piers. I've told my truth." "Your truth," Piers repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's an interesting phrase. What about the truth? The actual truth? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've made accusations that have damaged people's reputations without providing any real evidence." "I don't think you understand what it's like to be in my position," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. "I don't think you understand what it's like to be marginalized, to be silenced, to have your voice taken away." "Silenced?" Piers let out a short laugh. "You've done more interviews than I can count. You've been on magazine covers. You've had a documentary. You signed a deal worth millions of dollars. If that's being silenced, I'd love to know what having a voice looks like." Meghan's jaw clenched. "You're twisting my words." "I'm simply pointing out the facts," Piers said calmly. "You claim you were silenced, yet you've had every platform imaginable to share your story. You claim you were treated poorly, yet you married into one of the most privileged families on earth. Help me understand the contradiction." "There is no contradiction," Meghan shot back. "Just because I have access to platforms now doesn't mean I wasn't mistreated then. Just because I married into privilege doesn't mean I wasn't subjected to racism and cruelty." "Right, the racism claims," Piers said, setting down his coffee cup. "You've mentioned concerns about your son's skin color, but you won't say who made those comments. You won't provide context. You just throw out explosive allegations and expect everyone to accept them at face value. Don't you think that's irresponsible?" "I protected people by not naming them," Meghan said, her voice getting louder. "I could have named names. I could have destroyed people. But I didn't." "How noble of you," Piers said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You make vague accusations that paint an entire institution as racist. But because you don't name specific individuals, we're supposed to applaud your discretion. That's not how accountability works, Meghan." The audience was dead silent now. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. "You know what your problem is, Piers?" Meghan leaned forward, her eyes flashing. "Your problem is that you can't stand the fact that I walked away, that I chose my own happiness over duty, that I refuse to be broken by a system that chews people up and spits them out." "My problem," Piers said slowly, "is that you seem to want all the benefits of being a royal without any of the responsibilities. You want the titles, the platform, the money, the attention, but the moment there's any criticism or difficulty, you play the victim card." "Victim card?" Meghan's voice was sharp now. "I was suicidal, Piers. I was in the darkest place of my life. And you're going to sit here and tell me I'm playing the victim? I'm saying that making claims about being suicidal without any proof, without any medical records, without any corroboration is convenient, Piers replied. It's the ultimate conversation ender, isn't it? How can anyone question you when you claim you are contemplating taking your own life? It's emotional manipulation. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. How dare you? How dare you question my mental health? You have no idea what I went through. Sit down, Meghan, Piers said firmly. We're having a conversation. No, this isn't a conversation, Meghan said, her voice shaking with anger. This is an ambush. This is you trying to humiliate me on television. I'm asking you questions that any journalist would ask, Piers said, remaining seated. If you can't handle basic scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Basic scrutiny? Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've been obsessed with me for years, Piers. Everyone knows it. You're bitter because I rejected you, and now you've made it your life's mission to tear me down. The audience gasped. This was getting personal. Piers smiled, but his eyes were cold. Is that what you tell yourself? That anyone who criticizes you must be secretly in love with you? That's quite the narcissistic worldview you've got there. You're a bully, Meghan said, pointing at him. A pathetic little bully who hides behind a microphone and attacks women who threaten your fragile ego. And you're a manipulator, Piers fired back, standing up now too. You use your race, your gender, your mental health, anything you can weaponize to avoid taking responsibility for your own actions. You've turned victimhood into a brand, and you're making millions off it. At least I'm not a failed journalist clinging to relevance by attacking people more successful than him, Meghan snapped. More successful? Piers laughed. You're famous for marrying someone. That's it. That's your claim to fame. And the moment that marriage required actual work, actual sacrifice, you ran away and blamed everyone else for your failures. I left because I was being destroyed, Meghan said, her voice breaking slightly. Because every single day there were lies in the newspapers. Every single day I was being attacked. My family was being attacked. My son was being attacked. And nobody did anything to protect us. Maybe if you stopped courting the press when it suited you and then complaining about them when the coverage wasn't glowing, you'd have more credibility, Piers said. You can't have it both ways. You can't do secret interviews with your friends for sympathetic magazine pieces and then cry foul when other outlets are critical. You don't know what you're talking about, Meghan said. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Piers replied. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've interviewed presidents, prime ministers, celebrities, criminals, and in all that time, I've never seen someone play the game quite like you do. The constant contradictions, the selective memory, the convenient timing of your revelations. This is unbelievable, Meghan said, shaking her head. You're actually proud of yourself right now, aren't you? Proud of trying to break someone down on live television. I'm proud of doing my job, Piers said, which is to ask difficult questions and hold people accountable, something you're clearly not used to. Your job is to destroy people, Meghan said. That's all you do. You destroy people for ratings. I challenge people who make extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence, Piers corrected. There's a difference. You're impossible, Meghan said, throwing her hands up. There's no point in even trying to have a rational conversation with you. Now, who's running away from difficult questions? Piers said, raising an eyebrow. I'm not running away from anything, Meghan said. I'm choosing not to engage with someone who has already made up his mind about me. Someone who will twist everything I say to fit his narrative. My narrative is based on your own words, Piers said. Your own contradictory, ever-changing words. 1 minute you knew nothing about the royal family before you married in. The next minute you're an expert on protocol. 1 minute you were suicidal and begging for help. The next minute you're strong and empowered and nobody could break you. Which is it, Meghan? It's called being a human being, Meghan said. It's called growing and changing and surviving trauma. But you wouldn't understand that because you've never faced real hardship in your entire privileged life. Privileged? Piers laughed. You're lecturing me about privilege? You who went from a cable television actress to a duchess? You who now lives in a mansion in California? You who has more money than most people will see in 10 lifetimes? That's rich. Money doesn't protect you from racism, Meghan said. Money doesn't protect you from being treated like you're less than human. And there it is again, Piers said. The racism card. The conversation stopper. The thing you pull out whenever you're backed into a corner and can't defend your position with actual facts. It's not a card when it's true, Meghan said, her voice rising. It's not a card when people are making comments about your child's skin color. It's not a card when you're being compared to chimpanzees in the media. It's not a card when you're being treated differently than everyone else because of the color of your skin. Nobody is denying that you faced terrible treatment from some corners of the media, Piers said. But that's not the royal family's fault, and making blanket accusations against an institution without specifics is cowardly. Cowardly? Meghan's eyes widened. You're calling me a coward? If the shoe fits, Piers said with a shrug. You know what, Piers? I came here today thinking maybe, just maybe, we could have an honest conversation. That maybe you'd grown up since the last time we spoke. But I was wrong. You're still the same petty, bitter, small-minded man you've always been. And you're still the same calculating, manipulative, self-absorbed woman you've always been, Piers shot back. Only now you've got better PR. I'm done here, Meghan said, ripping off her microphone. I'm not going to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly has his own issues to work through. Running away again, Piers said, sitting back down in his chair. What a surprise. I'm not running away, Meghan said, her voice shaking with fury. I'm refusing to participate in this circus. There's a difference. The difference is semantics, Piers said calmly, picking up his coffee cup again. Either way, you're leaving because you can't handle the heat. You're a disgrace to journalism, Meghan said, gathering her purse. And you're a disgrace to the royal family you claim to have served, Piers replied smoothly. That was it. That was the line that broke the dam completely. How dare you, Meghan said, her voice going quiet and deadly. How dare you speak to me like that? Do you know who I am? And there it was, the moment everyone watching had been waiting for without even knowing it. 4 little words that revealed everything. Do I know who you are? Piers repeated, a smile spreading across his face. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're upset. That you're not being treated like royalty. That you're being questioned like a normal person instead of being bowed and scraped to. That's not what I meant, Meghan said quickly, realizing her mistake. Oh, I think it's exactly what you meant, Piers said. I think you've gotten so used to people walking on eggshells around you, so used to people being afraid to challenge you, that the moment someone treats you like everyone else, you can't handle it. You genuinely believe you're above criticism. I believe I deserve basic respect, Meghan said. And I'm giving you the same respect I give every guest on this show, Piers replied. Tough questions. Fair scrutiny. The opportunity to explain yourself. If you interpret that as disrespect, that says more about your expectations than it does about my behavior. You've been gunning for me from the start of this interview, Meghan said. I've been doing my job from the start of this interview, Piers corrected. Again, if you can't tell the difference, that's on you. You're twisting everything, Meghan said, her frustration visible. Everything I say, you twist it into something negative. I'm holding up a mirror, Piers said, and you don't like what you see. This is pointless, Meghan said. Completely pointless. I should never have agreed to come here. Finally, something we can agree on, Piers said. This has been a waste of everyone's time because you refuse to answer a single question honestly. I've been nothing but honest, Meghan protested. You've been nothing but evasive, Piers countered. Every question I've asked, you've deflected. You've played the victim. You've accused me of having ulterior motives, but you haven't actually addressed a single concern I've raised with facts or evidence. Because you're not interested in facts or evidence, Meghan said. You're interested in tearing me down. If that were true, I wouldn't have invited you on the show, Piers said. I gave you a platform to defend yourself, to set the record straight. And instead of taking that opportunity, you've spent the entire interview complaining about the questions. These aren't questions, they're attacks, Meghan said. They're questions you don't want to answer, Piers said. There's a difference. Meghan looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the crew, at the audience sitting in stunned silence. Her face was flushed, her hands were trembling slightly, and her carefully maintained composure was completely shattered. I'm leaving, she announced. I refuse to be part of this anymore. You're free to go whenever you like, Piers said, waving a hand dismissively. Nobody's forcing you to stay. You're unbelievable, Meghan said, shaking her head as she started toward the exit. And you're predictable, Piers called after her. The moment things get tough, you bail. It's what you do. It's your pattern. Meghan stopped in her tracks and turned around. My pattern? Let's talk about your pattern, Piers. Your pattern of obsessing over women who won't give you the time of day. Your pattern of using your show as a weapon against anyone who dares to stand up to you. Your pattern of hiding behind free speech while spreading toxicity and hate. Toxicity and hate? Piers laughed. I'm asking you to back up your claims with evidence. If that's toxic and hateful, then we're living in a very strange world indeed. We're living in a world where men like you think you can say whatever you want to women like me without consequences, Meghan said. Women like you, Piers repeated. What does that mean exactly? Women who make millions by airing private family grievances on international television. Women who abandon their families when things get difficult. Women who cry racism when they don't get their way. You're racist, Meghan said suddenly, pointing at him. That's what this is really about. You can't stand that a black woman married into the royal family. You can't stand that I didn't stay in my place. The audience gasped again. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Piers stood up slowly. His face was serious now, all traces of amusement gone. That, he said quietly, is a disgusting accusation, and you should be ashamed of yourself for making it. Truth hurts, doesn't it? Meghan said. The truth is that I've criticized plenty of people in my career, of all races, all genders, all backgrounds, Piers said, his voice hard. The truth is that I judge people on their actions and their character, not on the color of their skin. The truth is that you're using racism as a shield to avoid accountability, and it's despicable. You're despicable, Meghan shot back. I'm honest, Piers said. Something you wouldn't recognize if it hit you in the face. I'm done, Meghan said. I'm actually done now. This is harassment. This is abuse. And I'm not going to stand here and take it anymore. Then go, Piers said, sitting back down. Leave. Run away like you always do. But know that everyone watching will see exactly what you are. A person who can dish it out, but can't take it. A person who makes serious allegations, but crumbles under the slightest scrutiny. A person who demands respect, but shows none to others. And everyone watching will see exactly what you are, Meghan said, her voice shaking. A bully, a misogynist, a racist, a pathetic excuse for a human being who gets his kicks from humiliating people on television. Security, Piers said calmly, not even looking at her anymore. Please escort Ms. Markle from the building. I don't need an escort, Meghan said. I can find my own way out. I insist, Piers said. We wouldn't want you to get lost and claim we held you hostage. 2 security guards appeared from the wings. They didn't touch Meghan, but they stood ready to guide her toward the exit. This isn't over, Meghan said, her voice carrying across the studio. Yes, it is, Piersy replied, turning to look at her one last time. It's been over since the moment you walked in here thinking you could charm your way through this interview without being challenged. You misjudged your audience, you misjudged me, and most importantly, you misjudged how much people are willing to tolerate your victim narrative. My victim narrative? Meghan's voice was getting shrill now. I'm an actual victim. I've been victimized by the press, by the royal family, by people like you who refuse to see me as a human being. You're not a victim, Meghan, Piers said tiredly. You're a volunteer. You chose this life. You chose to marry into the royal family. You chose to do tell-all interviews. You chose to make allegations. Those were your choices. Own them. I'm owning my truth, Meghan said. There's that phrase again, Piers said. Your truth. Not the truth. Your truth. Because the actual truth doesn't fit your narrative, does it? Meghan opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She looked at Piers, at the cameras, at the audience. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and everyone could see the fury and frustration underneath. You haven't heard the last of me, she said finally. I'm sure I haven't, Piers said with a slight smile. You do love the attention, after all. And with that, Meghan Markle turned on her heel and walked off the set. The security guards followed at a respectful distance as she disappeared through the studio doors. The studio was silent for a long moment. Then Piers turned to the camera, his expression neutral. Well, he said. That was interesting. The audience erupted into applause. Piers waited for the noise to die down before continuing. I think we all saw what just happened here. I asked reasonable questions. I challenged claims that needed to be challenged. And rather than answer those questions, our guest chose to make personal attacks, throw out serious accusations with no evidence, and ultimately storm off when she couldn't control the narrative. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. This is what happens when people get used to softball interviews. When they get used to friendly journalists who nod along and never push back. They forget how to handle legitimate scrutiny. They mistake questions for attacks. They interpret disagreement as persecution. The audience was listening intently now. Meghan Markle came on this show with an agenda, Piers continued. She wanted to rehab her image. She wanted to play the victim one more time and have everyone feel sorry for her. But when I didn't play along, when I asked her to back up her claims, she couldn't do it. And rather than admit that, she lashed out. He set his coffee cup down. She called me a bully, a misogynist, a racist. These are serious accusations. These are career-ending accusations. And she threw them around like confetti because she was losing an argument. That should concern everyone. Because if you can't question Meghan Markle without being called a racist, then we've reached a point where certain people are above criticism, and that's dangerous. The audience applauded again. I want to be clear about something, Piers said, raising a hand for silence. I don't dislike Meghan Markle because of her race. I don't dislike her because she's a woman. I don't dislike her because she's American, or because she married Prince Harry, or because of any of the things she'll claim I dislike her for. He leaned forward. I dislike her because she's a hypocrite, because she preaches about privacy while doing interviews, because she talks about compassion while cutting off her own family, because she claims to want to help people while profiting from pain and drama. That's why I ask her tough questions, not because of who she is, but because of what she does. The studio doors burst open suddenly. Everyone turned to look. It was one of the producers, looking flustered. He hurried over to Piers and whispered something in his ear. Piers nodded, his expression unchanging. The producer hurried away. It seems, Piers said, turning back to the camera, that Ms. Markle is currently in the lobby, giving an impromptu interview to the gathered press about how poorly she was treated here today. Already playing the victim. Already controlling the narrative. Already doing exactly what I said she would do. He smiled slightly. Some people never learn. Some people never change. They just keep playing the same games over and over, hoping for different results. And as long as there are people willing to enable that behavior, willing to accept claims without evidence, willing to treat certain individuals as if they're above reproach, those games will continue. Piers stood up from his desk. But not here. Not on this show. Here, everyone gets asked the tough questions. Here, everyone has to defend their positions. Here, nobody is too famous, too powerful, or too protected to face scrutiny. That's the promise I make to you, the viewers. And it's a promise I'll never break, no matter who storms off my set. The audience gave him a standing ovation. As the applause continued, Piers gathered his notes and walked off the set, leaving his coffee cup behind. The cameras stayed on the empty desk for a moment before cutting to commercial. In the lobby, Meghan was indeed surrounded by reporters, talking about her terrible experience on the show. But inside the studio, the crew was already resetting for the next segment. The seats were being straightened. The lights were being adjusted. The show was going on. Because in the end, that's what shows do. They go on. With or without the guests who can't handle the heat. With or without the people who mistake tough questions for persecution. With or without those who believe they're entitled to special treatment simply because of who they are. The studio doors closed. The interview was over. And everyone who watched knew exactly what they had witnessed. Not a journalist attacking a guest, but a guest attacking a journalist for doing his job. Not a victim being victimized, but someone who plays the victim being exposed. That was the story. That was the truth. Not her truth. Not his truth. Just the truth. Plain and simple. Captured on camera for millions to see and judge for themselves.